people in. Here we go. All right, so anyway, welcome to our Intro to Judaism class. I've done many of these classes over the years, and it's one of the most enjoyable things I get to do as a rabbi, and I always love doing it, but it's always the most frustrating possible class you can teach. Because, you always say, all right, I'm going to put a spotlight on me. All right, so we always say that, I wish we had more time, we could cover this, we could cover that, but in the end, this is the ultimate test of the more time where you don't have time to cover everything. So I'm just going to show you, this is the curriculum that we've set up. I should mention that the idea of doing this class came about because I have right now a handful of students who are studying for the process of becoming Jews by choice, potentially. I say that very carefully because it's never to be assumed that someone is going to convert. We say Jews by choice a little more. It's much more of a positive step. Conversion sounds like, it sounds like installation. It's something you do to something. It's not something that you voluntarily become. So anyway, so I do have a few students among the people who've signed up, and I thought, wow, maybe this is a good opportunity to do a class like this. Ideally, this would not be 10 sessions, but I understand we all have very busy lives. And so right now, that's what we're looking at, 10 sessions. Normally, when I've done this class, this type of class in the past, it's been at least 20. For students who do study with me to become Jews by choice, I recommend that they take a class like this, but preferably in person, especially in non-COVID times, where they get a chance to meet with people and talk with people, and that's an important part of this process. And also that it be about 20 to 30 sessions. That's that's sort of optimal. 10 sessions is not. I mean, you can look at the lineup here, and you can think automatically of lots of things that we are not including here. And the editorial process is excruciating. I mean, for one thing, when I say Bible in ancient Israel, each one of those is a semester. So next week is a semester, just so you know. I'm going to focus a little more on the Bible, but also I believe it's important to talk about the history of the period too. So, we'll try to combine. Same thing with Talmud and Rabbinic Judaism. We're talking March 23rd, 500 years or more in an hour. Good luck with that. Passover and the festival cycle. Well, I think it's important to talk about the calendar as a whole. So I'm going to squeeze all those holidays into the week before Passover, which is a good time to do it because everyone has Passover questions around Passover. Shabbat, I'm still learning about. You study that all your life. Holocaust in Israel, this is really about Jewish peoplehood and anti-Semitism and so many other things. I could spend a semester on just the past 5 days in Israel. So, but that's what we're going to do. Food, prayer, God and Messiah, June 1, don't miss it. And ethics. I'm actually going to give a sneak preview of that possibly tonight. So you can see where we're headed here. It's going to be a little haphazard, but I'm going to try to distill things to the simplest possible imparting of knowledge. It's not easy. And anyway, I'm going to ask again that people mute if you can as a default, and then you decide, if there are times when we might ask questions, we might unmute. But for the most part, please mute yourselves. That way we won't have any drastic interference. Okay, so, I'm going to try to distill things as best I can. There's where the advantage of being a trained journalist somewhat bumps up against being a rabbi. As a rabbi, as you know, rabbis tend to speak a lot. Journalists try to edit things down. So I'm going to try to let the journalist in me overcome the rabbi in me at times, so that we can get some key points across. So I'm going to go pretty fast when I talk, but I want you, please, to promise that you will put questions into the chat. Right now I'm not using gallery view that much, so the chat is really the only way I'll know if you have a question. If you raise your hand electronically, I might know, but still the chat is the best bet. And I encourage you to do that because I really don't want to get too far ahead of you. All right, so tonight we're going to talk about just sort of the basic definition of what it is to be a Jew. What does it mean to be a Jew? We're going to come up with a unified theory of Judaism in an hour, actually 53 minutes. Good luck with that too. I also want to show you, this is the text that I highly recommend for this class or for any class that's teaching Jewish literacy. Very easy title to remember, Jewish Literacy. Joseph Telushkin, Rabbi Joseph Telushkin is the author, and at times I'll be putting links into the chat. I don't have the link for this right now, but for those who are taking this class for credit, meaning those who are studying with me for other purposes, absolutely that book is a requirement. For the rest of you, I think it's really good to get. It'll help, even though we're not necessarily going to cover exactly what Joseph Telushkin covers. It's an encyclopedia, but it's an encyclopedia that reads like a novel. So, and it's fairly objective in that, and that's impossible to do when you're talking about discussing Judaism, because there's such a wide range, there's such a spectrum of Jewish opinions, Jewish approaches. As you're undoubtedly aware, there are three major denominations in America, but untold numbers of variations, and those denominations are somewhat splintering too. By those I mean Orthodoxy, Conservative, and Reform. So Telushkin falls really on the more traditional end, but definitely palatable and understanding for those who are on the more progressive side. I don't use this sort of vertical, Orthodoxy on top, Reform on the bottom, Conservative in the middle. That's not true at all. It's more of a wide spectrum. But so Telushkin is fair. He will give you different opinions. If you're looking for another very good source for Jewish knowledge, for all of your questions about Judaism, online, the best source I can give you is myjewishlearning.com. MyJewishLearning, one word, no capitalizing, .com. You might, if you follow my Shabbatogram, my weekly emails, you'll know that I often quote or link to articles from there. Again, it is fairly middle of the road. It gives you a wide variety. It has many authors for their pieces, and is easy to understand, and also, I have to say, frankly, not offensive to those from a more inclusive vision of Judaism, which, I have a bias that's definitely on the more inclusive, let's say, progressive side. I'm conservative, trained as a conservative rabbi, but very comfortable within the worlds of Reconstructionism, Reform on the more progressive side of Judaism. So I just want you to sort of know the landscape. That's, I really wanted to start out with that, because, and if you ask me, anyone who asks me at any time, what should I use as a resource? I went on Chabad. Chabad, you cannot miss the Chabad website. It's undoubtedly the most popular, and so it's moved its way up on Google. So if you ask a question, very often you'll see the Chabad thing on top, and it's not so bad. In fact, I often use it, but you have to sort of know what you're getting. And the Chabad worldview is very different. Orthodoxy in general, like the Orthodox Union, the OU, is very different. And if you're looking for a certain approach to Judaism that's more progressive, you're not going to find it there. As long as you know that going in, then you can take it for what it is, which is what I do, but I have sort of a trained eye in that regard. So I would stick to something like My Jewish Learning, and there are other sites. There's a Jewish Virtual Library as well. Almost all the time you do a search for anything Jewishly, you will find a Messianic Jewish site. Very often they are not listed as such. They are somewhat sneaky in that regard. And although the more progressive branches of Judaism are very inclusive, that falls outside the fence. And I don't know really, I don't want to get into it now because I don't want to give it more time than it's due, but there's a deceptive quality to it. And the goal very often is a goal of trying to evangelize, trying to turn Jews into something other than Jews. That's, I'll leave it at that, but just know that that's very often the site that you're going to find. And then suddenly you'll see stuff about Yeshua and Jesus and what's this? This is a Judaism class. All right. So we had a great class on Judaism and Christianity. It just ended. So I'm going back to Judaism now. All right. So let's get back to the question at hand. What is Judaism? And there's no real wrong answer. I suppose there might be some wrong answers. The answers I very much violently disagree with. In fact, any answer that would involve violence is an answer I disagree with. We're not going to talk a lot about Israel right now because there is a session that we'll get into that. But there was a scene this past week of a very violent encounter where Jews who felt vengeful and were angered, and justifiably in some ways, by a terror attack that killed 2 Jews on the West Bank, attacked an Arab village. And Hawara, I believe the name is. And you can see online, maybe you've come across videos of what has been called a pogrom of this Arab village, where 1 was killed, houses damaged or destroyed, many, up to maybe 100 people setting fire, running wild. The police did not stop it for 3 hours or more. It was really, it is something that the Jewish world and in Israel were wringing our hands over. It's very upsetting. But the point I want to make is the video that has gone viral is of this group while the fires are burning in the background, standing together and praying. Davening Mariv. Davening means praying in Yiddish. Mariv is the evening service. And just imagine, this juxtaposition. They actually were doing the Kaddish of all things. And almost the message that's sending is that this is what God wants. God wants this kind of revenge. This is the God we pray to. This is the Judaism we follow. So when I say that I violently disagree with any Judaism that promotes violence, that would be the Judaism I disagree with. On the other hand, I'm not going to write it out of the Jewish story, and I think it needs to be discussed. It needs to be talked about, and then we need to get to what I feel to be the essence of Judaism, which is a message of peace and goodwill and unity and harmony and all of the things that we strive for in a tradition that has lasted for 4,000 years, 3,500, give or take, and has changed dramatically each generation, and yet still maintains this thread, this peaceful, loving, unifying thread. So I want to try to communicate that tonight and not get into the violent part as we go through. But again, who is a Jew? What is a Jew? So that's the question at hand. And I asked, some of you may have seen, like a week ago or so, for people to start thinking about your own personal answer to that question. And if you have like a quick, elevator kind of answer that you can put into the chat, that would be great. I'd love to see a few of them. Meanwhile, let's see. So, wait, hold on 1 second. If I can do this. All right, so this is what I did on the high holidays. As you can see, this is from my blog, joshuahammerman.com. Very easy. If you ever, It's not as good as my Jewish learning, but I got a lot on there after so many years. So this, can you all see it, by the way? I can't even ask you because I can't see you. I hope you can see it. If not, someone unmute and say, where is
All
it?
set.
You good? Okay, good. All right. So this was a project very often, and not so much recently, although occasionally, I'll have the congregation do a project during the high holidays where we, one year we tried not to gossip for 10 days. Try that. It was a lot of fun. But this particular year in 2004, we had a 10 days project where we discussed the whole question of what does it mean to be Jewish. So let's see. So here are some of the responses that came in. You may know some of the people. All right, let's stop off at Scott Allen for a second. Someone can tell Scott his name was dropped in this class. Being Jewish gives me an incredible sense of community, of oneness, of wholeness, of feeling at home anywhere in the world when attending services and reading Hebrew in the prayer book, regardless of the language being spoken within and about the prayers, the overwhelming sense of pride, joy, and sadness at landing in Israel, and knowing I've come home, a sense of comfort at being able to light Shabbat candles and say the Kiddush and other blessings, and know millions of people are doing or have done the same things in similar fashion at that moment and throughout the ages. And then Scott gets into the love of food, the smells, and it's just really beautifully written. So thank you, Scott. Let's skip merrily down. Roz Rubin had younger kids at the time, and she said, I read this email right before putting Karen and Amitan to bed, so I decided to ask them what it means to them. These kids were very young at the time, around 10 or younger. What it means to be Jewish. It's interesting. They both had a similar theme revolving around mitzvot and kindness. Karen said, to be Jewish means to be kind, not mean, not to lie or bully people. It's important to show God you are a nice person by helping others and doing mitzvot. Isn't that beautiful? She was really young at the time. I feel like personal pride. Not that I'm responsible for everyone's opinions about Jewishness, but the parents, we had this partnership, and just for kids to feel that great about being Jewish is really just what we call a mechaya, life affirming. So many of you know Mallory Yolen Cohen. Go tell her that she was name dropped here too. Being Jewish goes beyond knowing that in Yom Kippur there are millions of Jews praying, just as I'm in synagogues around the world all at once, like the May the Lord Protect You candlelighting scene from Fiddler on the Roof. It goes beyond knowing that we're connected back to so many prior generations, that Jeff's cells contain the same DNA as the original Mr. Cohen, Aaron himself. Being Jewish is more than eating matzah on Passover and chocolate money on Hanukkah. Thank God. It's about knowing that wherever I go, there will at least be one person who knows my cousin or my childhood best friend or my USY president brother. Being Jewish means one big community separated by oceans. So that focuses on peoplehood, and we'll get to people. We'll talk about that. She talks a little about anti-Semitism and Holocaust. All right, this Marlon did this. I love being Jewish. I look upon the tree of life with all its branches. One is kindness, one is study, one is good deeds. This is all I need to live my life. Wow. Kathy Pazeltiner, whom I actually saw last week, she moved away a few years ago, but she was back here. For me, being Jewish means feeling safe, light at the end of the journey, and inspired by Israel. Carol Sander, very proud to be a Jew and try to live a religious life. Judy, you're quoted here. I think Judy's on this. I am a Jew because my faith demands no abdication of the mind. If this is a famous passage written in the 19th century about I am a Jew, and it was in our prayer book. And Fred Golliv, To me, being Jewish means forwarding our deep traditions of self-transformation, using ritual and study of Torah to help me grow into a better or happier person every day. So I thought that would really just whet your appetite. To quote from people, some of whom you know, people in the congregation, and or who were in the congregation, and I've just put the link for that in the chat. So if you want to click on it, you'll have it up on your browser, and you can look at the rest of them later on. And of course, you can always go back to my my blog. So I wondered if anyone wanted to share anything. I don't see anything in the. Oh wait. Oh no, that's okay. Okay, all right. So the answer that I'm seeing so far is no one has an answer. And that's okay. After all, why would you take this class if you had all the answers? All right. So let me all right, I'm going to give you a little bit. Yeah, I'm going to give you 3 concepts. I gave 4 sermons about this topic that year in 2004, and I was going to quote a little bit from it, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go right to the answer. And the answer is really in words from the Hebrew. And I want to make a sort of a paid political announcement, not for any particular party, but for a language, for Hebrew. You know, being Jewish means a lot of different things, but it means all of those things and then some in the original, in Hebrew. Now, I understand how hard it is to learn Hebrew, and I don't expect everyone to learn. Even our bar mitzvah students, you know, we sort of try to coax them for a long time, and it's a real challenge. I'm so happy that so many over the years have tried to be able to pray in Hebrew at least, and a lot of that comes from repetition more than, you know, actual training. Hey there, Andrew, I just saw you, so make sure to. Right, okay. That was just everyone to mute. All right, so but to be able to recognize the magic of Hebrew, that's what I really want. Even if you can't read it, that's fine. To understand its antiquity, its antique nature, how when we talk about English, we're talking about a language that, you know, I mean, think about Shakespeare. What, 500 years ago? It's recognizably English, but very hard for anyone to understand who, you know, is sort of growing up with high school level English here, you know, in this country at this time. Of course, I could say talking to Gen Z is impossible for me to understand. There's a whole new language that's being developed. English is evolving very quickly. But an Israeli child could pick up the Bible, words written 3,500 years ago, and could translate it verbatim. 35, think of the linkage, think of the connection that's forged by knowing a language that connects you back 3,500 years. And that actually has connections to the roots of all language, of all alphabets. The first alphabet very much is either of the sort of Canaanite, Proto-Hebraic ilk that all alphabets come from. And then you go back to pictogram type cuneiform languages, and they also have connections to ancient Hebrew. So, you know, that's why I find Hebrew to be so powerful. And I'll get into that a little more next week when we talk about ancient Israel. But for the purpose of tonight, I want to make this comment to start off, because the way I'm going to teach you what the essence of Judaism is by picking about a half dozen Hebrew words and analyzing them and showing you what they mean, what their deeper meaning is. And that way you'll begin to understand, you know, what Judaism is. So Jews are called many things, unfortunately these days, and all days. But 3 things, we've had basically 3 names, and among others. All right, so I want to get to them. The first one is Israel. Yisrael. So you see the Hebrew on the top, the English on the bottom. Am I getting a little too basic here? Hebrew is right to left. English is left to right. I'm trying to take nothing for granted. And it's really important that I have that approach while not talking down to anyone. So Yisrael, if you're looking at the word Israel, it's fascinating because it is the combination of two words. Yisra, remember from right to left, Yud, sin. That's a sin because the dot is on the left side of the letter. Resh, R, Yisra, Yisra, and El. That's an aleph, that sort of squiggly letter. And then the last one, the long letter, the tall letter, is a lamed. Lamed, lambda, basically, again, the Hebrew alphabet connects to all major alphabets. So Yisrael. Yisra means to struggle, to fight. And it also has the spelling yashar, which means right, upright, straight, and correct. So a lot of fights begin when everyone thinks they're right, they're correct. So that's an interesting thing to say, but it's also about two opponents sort of standing, the image of standing up against an equal opponent in a wrestling ring, or boxing ring for that matter. And the word El is God, is one of the names of God. There are hundreds of names for God, but the most common early name is that, El, or El is a suffix for, or a prefix for names that connect to God. So many Hebrew names have El at the end. Yechezkel, Ezekiel, for instance. Elchanan is my father-in-law's Hebrew name. God is merciful. So the other prefix that you'll find in a lot of Hebrew names is a Yud. Yud, He, Vav, He. Yud is one of God's names. We translate it to Adonai or Lord, but some, in ancient history would Yahweh, would Yehovah, whatever, the unpronounceable name. But anyway, El is a name for God. So to struggle with God, that's one of the concepts of Israel. That is the essence of Israel. We are Israel. If we were in a classroom, I'd ask quickly who had the name Israel. And if anyone could write into the chat, we'll see who's on the ball here. Anybody? What biblical character had the name of Israel? Trying to make sure it gives me a chance to drink.
Do you mean an author?
No. A person in the Bible who was given the name Israel.
Jacob.
There you go. Right. Thank you. Okay. Thanks, Jacob. All right. Yaakov was changed to Israel. When did he get the name Israel? I'll answer that. When Jacob fought with some opponent, some say an angel, some say himself in the mirror, some say God in some form. He was struggling, whatever it was, he was struggling. But the most common impression in terms of commentaries is that he was fighting with God, that he struggled with God. And the name doesn't just mean struggles with God, but also struggled with God and prevailed. Yisrael struggled with God and prevailed. So Jacob struggles with God, a God wrestler. If you're looking at the essence of what does it mean to be a Jew, someone who struggles with God. I think that is just, I wouldn't want to have it any other way. If I were inventing a religion, or a God for that matter, I would want one whom I could struggle with. Really what that is talking about is asking questions, never accepting things at face value. Now, just by contrast, and I do not disparage any other religion. This is a matter of contrast. Islam comes from a word that means acceptance and submission, and there is an element of that in Judaism. Certainly, there is submission to God, to God's will. I mean, you think of Abraham in the classic story where Abraham is commanded to bring Isaac up to the mountain to sacrifice Isaac. There was submission, at least in the way some have interpreted it, although Abraham does kvetch about God's decision to kill the people of Sodom just a chapter before. So you wonder really how much submission was it. But whatever it is, there's a contrast there. And so struggling with God is Yisrael. That defines the essence, in my mind, of a Jew and of Judaism. What's interesting is that Judaism, and it's important to say this right out up front, there is no dogma to Judaism. And as a dog owner, that bothers me a little. No. Judaism has some issues with dogs too occasionally. But there's no dogma, meaning there are very few, if any, things that you have to believe in order to be, quote unquote, good Jew. I know I never liked that expression, but it's important to note. Now, there are statements of faith, and certainly philosophers like Maimonides in the Middle Ages came up with 13 statements of faith. It comes through in the Yigdal prayer that we sometimes chant on holidays, including a belief in a Messiah, belief in God, etc., etc. It definitely helps to have a concept of God, although I wouldn't dictate as to what that concept needs to be or look like, but it's not a prerequisite. There is a double standard for those who end up becoming a Jew by choice, in that you do need to accept some sense of belief system in, and I'll say God for lack of a better term right now. But someone who's born Jewish, who is by every account definably Jewish, can be an atheist and never even address the question of God and be a full-fledged Jew throughout one's life. Is a puzzlement, as Yul Brynner would say after he played Pharaoh. It's unusual, it's strange, it's a double standard as well, but being Jewish is about religion, it's about belief, it's about identification, it's about ethnicity, it's about family, it's about tribe, it's about peoplehood. That's the word we'll use most often, peoplehood. But it's also about values and ethics and actions. And those actions are called, and I don't have it up here on a whiteboard or anything, mitzvot, commandments. But really, the word commandment, again, gets back to that whole submissiveness issue. Yes, we're obligated to the commandments by virtue of the deal we struck with God. We struck a covenant with God at Mount Sinai, but even before that, we struck a covenant with God with circumcision for males, and more generally speaking, for females who are certainly part of the Mount Sinai coalition. By the way, that literally is cutting a deal with God that Abraham cut with circumcision when he was 99 years old. So it's more than just a people. It's more than just a faith. It's sort of a combination. Problem is, here in America, we have a very hard time defining a faith group as anything but a group that believes in something. And that was true in Western Europe too, where Jews were often forced to give up their sense of nationality or peoplehood. It's confusing. But anyway, Yisrael, like all of these terms that I'm going to mention, has that element of peoplehood to it. And that, of course, is the people of Israel. Jacob's children, Jacob's sons became the 12 tribes, and they later became the people of Israel. But, as I said, Yisrael is also all about struggling with God. So we have the struggle with God, we have the peoplehood. Here's an interesting thing. When I mean struggling, when I say struggling, I mean struggling. Okay, the Talmud is, and we'll talk about it in a few weeks, I don't want to say what it is, but it has disputations, arguments, case studies of conversations in academies over the course of 5-6 centuries between groups of rabbis who became the leaders after the Second Temple was destroyed. Again, I'll get to the history next week and beyond. Those discussions ended up into a system of laws based on the Torah has laws in them, in it, as part of it has narrative, it has mitzvot, according to Maimonides 613. But then you get to the Talmud, and each one of them is sort of dissected and analyzed and discussed, and in some cases tossed away. They had a lot of chutzpah back then. There were certain mitzvot that had no relevance to them when they weren't living in the land of Israel, for instance, and there were no sacrifices after the temple was destroyed. But the most interesting aspect of it is all these legal discussions that went on. Rarely do they end up in some kind of slam dunk conclusive ruling. Talk about struggling. There are no fewer in the Talmud than 319 passages where a legal discussion ends with the expression teku. Teku is a shortened form, an acronym for Tishbi Yit Aretz Kushiyot Ushe'elot. Tishbi meaning Elijah, who was the Tishbite. He was from that place. Elijah will give you the answer. Meaning Elijah will tell us when the Messiah comes, because the belief is that Elijah is the one who's going to herald the coming of the Messiah. Meaning we're not going to deal with it right now. A teku is an agreement to disagree, but to agree that we're going to disagree, and it's unresolved. 319 passages in the Talmud that end up with a discussion where no one gets the answer right. And that's just such a human thing. That's such an amazing thing. And it also speaks to a great sense of humility, that we don't always know the answers. And God isn't going to give it to us in a silver platter. We're going to struggle to find truth. And truth will be between you and me, sort of like what Martin Buber, the philosopher, would say with I and thou. The truth is between us. All right, so that's fascinating, and it involves humility. And speaking of humility, my second word. And while I'm doing my second word, anyone have any questions, please put them into the chat. I have no way of knowing if I've lost you, if you're all off on some desert island somewhere or gone back to Egypt. This word is Yehudi. Yehudi. So Jews are known as Israel, Yisrael. Jews are also known as Jews. The word Yehudi means Jew. Yehudi comes from the tribe of Judah. One of Jacob's sons was Judah. If you look at a map, and we'll have maps, you're going to see all kinds of goodies. But the tribe of Judah was in the south, from Jerusalem basically on down. It didn't include Jerusalem. That was in the tribe of Benjamin. But it was the largest of the tribes, and the one that survived, aside from the priests and Levites, all that, after the northern 10 tribes were destroyed in 721 before the Common Era by the Assyrians. Again, you don't need to remember that now either. Judah survived. So once Judah survived, the people who lived there were known as Judeans, people of Judah, or Jews, especially when the people were exiled in 586 BCE by the Babylonians to Babylonia. A good amount of the people, not all of them. And when they were in Babylonia, the very last books of the Bible were sort of compiled, not the Bible so much, but the Torah part of it, and some of the prophets. And what's fascinating is that that's the first time, the whole Torah, basically, you don't see the word Yehudi, you don't see the word Jew until, and most of the Bible till the latter prophets, where they start using that term, because the Babylonians needed to identify us, and we sort of needed an identity. Anyway, Yehudi. So it's a peoplehood issue. Tribe of Judah, Jew. We think of the Jews as the Jewish people, but it also has a value attached to it. Like Israel, the struggle with God, Yehudi comes from the Hebrew word for gratitude. Todah. You say, please and thank you in Hebrew, and you say Todah. If you're in Israel, that's one of the first words they'll teach you never to say. I can hear you laughing, because they're not always that polite. All right, but Todah means thank you, gratitude, humility, Yehudi. Rabbi Yitzchak of Kozmir, a Hasidic Rebbe, said, "Why do we say the blessing on the fringes of the talit, the tzitzit, rather than on the tallis itself, the garment? Why do you say it on the fringes? Because the fringes hang down and are dragged along the ground humbly. That is why they are most important." There's a humility, a deep humility, an attitude of gratitude to being a Jew. If you look at our prayer book, and we are going to look at the prayer book, 10 sessions, we're going to do all this stuff. 2/3 to 3/4 of the prayers are prayers of gratitude, are prayers of, oh my God, I am so amazed. I am awestruck to live in this world, to see these beautiful wonders of nature, to have the ability to think, to have the ability that we have a whole bunch of blessings at the beginning of the service, where traditionally Jews say 100 blessings a day. Most of them in the prayers, 3 times, we pray 3 times traditionally. Many of them in the morning service, but also spontaneously. There are prayers to seeing a sunset. There are prayers for seeing a rainbow, prayers for scary aspects of nature, thunder, lightning, storms, prayers when you see a great person, a blessing to see a great person, royalty even. So, you just have this sense of humility. It doesn't drag you down. It actually exalts humanity, because to be humble is to fully live, to fully appreciate, to understand that we can't do anything alone. That, you can have 9 rabbinic saints, although we don't have saints necessarily, and you won't have a minyan. If you bring 10 professional wrestlers, you have a minyan, or 1 wrestler and 9 rabbis. But you get what I'm saying. It's not about your station in life. It's just about being a human being, reaching out to help another human being. So there's something beautiful about that. The prophet Micah said, "And what does God require of you? To do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God." So that's the second definition of a Jew that I think is essential, is foundational. I'm not just cherry picking these words. I believe that they are at the essence of what it means to be a Jew. So let me give you a third. And I showed it to you quickly. Here it is. Ivri. Ivri means Hebrew. Abraham is the first one known as an Ivri. He is Abraham the Hebrew, before there were Jews, before there was Israel. Remember, Jacob got the name Yisrael. Abraham is two generations earlier. In Hebrew, la'avor it's just a fascinating word. It means a lot of things, but it means to cross over, to go from one side to the other. Of course, Abraham did exactly that. Think of the Fertile Crescent. He went from the Mesopotamian side all the way across, up through southern Lebanon and down into the Promised Land, avoiding the desert areas and the mountainous areas. So he was the one who crossed over. He also crossed over from one culture to another. He was able to make that leap of faith. And let's see what I got here. Of course, the language of Hebrew is just the feminine form of Ivrit. Hebrew is, unfortunately divided in such gender basis. But anyway, Ivrit is the language, Hebrew. Avor, again, and avar means past. So part of what you're doing when you leap forward is you sort of go from the past, into the future. Just to show you something interesting, I don't know if you can see this very clearly, but the language on top is Hebrew, of course. Language on the bottom, Hebrew. It's just the most ancient form of Hebraic alphabet that you can find. It's, over 3,000 years old. Hebrew was Hebrew. It goes all the way back to that. So, all right. So we have Ivrit, Lavor, crossing over, going from one side to another. Remember I talked about, the wrestlers sort of facing each other, God and us, in conflict, but not really in conflict. We're just oppositional. We're just struggling with each other. Well, there's a definite oppositional, two-sided aspect to Ivrit as well, to crossing over, because really what we're talking about when we go from one side to another is that we have distinctions being drawn. Judaism is a religion that focuses on distinction, especially, and we think of the Havdalah prayer that we end Shabbat. Havdalah means to distinguish, to separate. There's a passage from Havdalah in the book of Esther this week, which you'll have to come on Monday night or tune in on Zoom to hear it. But the idea is that we distinguish between Kodesh v'chol, holy and profane time, holy and profane, or holy and secular. It's not bad, it's just not holy. Food, kosher versus unkosher. There are distinctions that are constantly being drawn. Bein kodesh l'chol, bein or l'choshech, the sun, the day and night. We draw distinctions. We're always sort of looking at the world in ways of opposition, of looking at opposites. But the idea is not so much to divide the world between us and them. We're not necessarily looking at a binary equation in any sense, because what's fascinating is that what Jews always are trying to do is bridge these gaps. La'avor means to cross over from holy to secular. We bring our holy week of Shabbat into the secular week. We start looking forward to Shabbat from Sunday on. Sunday in Hebrew is called Yom Rishon, the first day, Shabbat, of the next Shabbat week. So we base our entire internal clock on this notion of looking forward to the next encounter with holy time. So, that's a really important aspect of this. When does Shabbat begin? When did Jewish days begin? Someone wants to just quickly write into the chat. When did Jewish days begin? Midnight? No.
No, but I think it's 18 minutes before the sun sets.
Right. So, but actually that's when we light candles, Andrew. Yes, sundown. Thank you, guys. Thank you, everyone. All right, so sundown is the key. We start Shabbat 18 minutes before. We light candles 18 minutes before because we don't know the exact moment Shabbat begins. Because really, when is sundown? You can be standing on a mountain and the sun will go down over the horizon at a given time. You can be at the shore and it's going to be at a different time. You can be in New York, you can be in Boston. I mean, it's always different. It's always inexact, even though astronomically there might be an exact time. And the rabbis were meticulous about timing. Sorry. So the idea is that there is no exact holy and profane. There is no exact light and dark. There's only the in-between. That's where things get interesting. Shabbat begins at a time, we call it sundown or dusk. In Hebrew, it's called Bein Hashmashot, between the suns. So it's between one day and another. It's not specifically one day. So anyway, that's an important aspect, because ultimately what starts as two, ends as one. Ivri, we cross over from one to another. That's an essence, part of the essence of being Jewish. Let me continue. I'm mindful of the clock here. I'm not going to run, but I want to make sure we hit some of the major points. Echad. So the three ways that Jews are called is Yisrael, Yehudi, and Ivri. Those are the three things, that basically three names for Jews. Echad is a key word. Echad means one. And when we talk about, the two of Jacob and whatever he was opposing, us and God, sort of in opposition, in discussion, in conversation, and Chodesh and Chol, Shabbat, and the rest of the week, and all the, everything is divided into two, but ultimately we want everything to merge into oneness. Echad is such a key, and of course, Echad is the key word to our most important prayer, the Shema, which, although this is very small, the Shema is here. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Aleph, Chet, Daled. You know what's really interesting about that word? There's a trick that we use in Hebrew, in mysticism, in Kabbalah, called gematria. If I were to try to teach you about Kabbalah, this would not be a 10-session class. But I'll give you a little bit here and there. So gematria takes letters and corresponds them to numbers. Aleph is 1, Bet is 2, basically you go down the line. So here, and then you find hidden connections between words through that approach. So Aleph is 1, Chet is 8, Dalet is 4. Trust me, it equals 13. What else equals 13? Ahava, love. Aleph is 1, Hey is 5, Vet is 2, Hey is 5 again. So 5, 5 is 10, plus 2. I was actually a cashier in my uncle's supermarket while I was going through rabbinical school. In the summer job, great job, I had to learn how to add. So anyway, that comes up to 13 too. 13 is a number I've learned very well over the years, just because of bar mitzvah training. All right, so think about it. Ahava and oneness and love are key elements to Judaism. And that's so important. All of these things are starting to give us a picture of what does it mean to be a Jew, just through these key Hebrew words. Here's another word. It has nothing to do with who is a Jew, but it has to do with what Judaism focuses on. Simcha, joy. That we're in the happiest month of the year, Adar. It says in the Talmud that when Adar begins, Keshenichnas Adar marbim simcha, joy increases. What kind of joy is it? I actually got into a discussion on this last week. It's a very life-affirming kind of joy. It's not short-term, it's long-term. It leads from Purim into Passover. It's a progression. It's optimistic. It also shows the surprises of life and turning things up on their head. Anyway, simcha, joy. While we're at it, another key Hebrew word, probably the most important, shalom. Shalom gets to the whole notion that we're always striving, we're aspirational. What are we aspiring for? Peace. Shalom. You notice the word on the letter on the left, that's a final mem. It's actually, is a very maternal sound, ima. The first word that many babies say is mother, but there's a sense of it being all-encompassing too. It closes the circle. Shalom. It just sort of has a beautiful ring to it, and it symbolizes completeness. We're always hoping, we're always striving for peace. All of our hellos and all of our goodbyes are leading us in this process that's heading toward, hopefully, a peaceful end. There's no more important word in our tradition than shalom. And as I said with these other words, it has a peoplehood element to it. Because what is our most important city called? Yerushalayim, the city of peace. It's interesting in terms of aspiration. When the Beatles came up with the song "Let It Be," there's a Jewish version of it. Lu Yehi, Naomi Shemer wrote in the 1970s during the horrible first days of the 1973 war. But Lu Yehi doesn't mean "let it be." It means, if only it would be. If only, Lu Yehi, that anything we would hope for, Kol Shenivakesh, Lu Yehi. So Jews dream impossible dreams, but then the if only part means we can't be passive. We have to be active. We have to go about and make those dreams come true. We can't just let it be. We can't let it come to us. We have to bring it to the world. I think that's a beautiful way of expressing what it means to be a Jew. So I did all that in 58 minutes. I'm just like really impressed with myself. But there's more. So I'll give you a couple more little quick things. The people and religion are inseparable. So, I said this before, but it's worth repeating. You can't talk about being Jewish as just a religion, but you can't talk about being Jewish as just a secular people either. That's why we struggle so much with Israel, with the aspirational Israel, as opposed to the reality, the stark realities of Israel. And I should also mention, since we're talking about definitions of Judaism, there is an important element here. There is a legal element, Jewish legal, Jewish tradition. If one has a Jewish mother, biological mother for the most part, but not just biological, you're automatically presumed to be a Jew. It has to do with lots of things, especially because back in 2,000 years ago, the DNA testing was not great. It was non-existent for that matter. And so you almost always knew who the mother was. You didn't always know who the father was. So you could define it that way. You should note that in the Bible, especially in the Torah, patrilineal descent, meaning determining one's identity from the father, is more common. We see that with the tribal association affiliations. We see that with Joseph, who was married to an Egyptian. There was never a question about the kids. Queen Esther, we're going to read about next week, was married to a Persian. Rabbis go through quite a few calisthenics to say that Achashverosh actually converted, or they never had sex, or you can go to all kinds of lengths to say that Esther didn't intermarry, whatever. I'm not going to go there. The point is that you go from patrilineal to more of a matrilineal definition. However, the Reform movement in 1985 in America shifted that over to more of an egalitarian, or let's say patrilineal definition, that you could have a Jewish father with a non-Jewish mother and be considered Jewish. There are some non-binary identifications that are starting to bubble up. But the question is, it actually, there was a conference, who is a Jew? How do you define a Jew? And someone finally said, they were so exasperated, anyone crazy enough to want to be a Jew, that's a Jew. And I think there's a little bit of truth to that, because it's not so much that it's crazy to be a Jew, but it is in some ways complicated, in a lot of ways complicated. A lot of people don't like you, who don't even know you. That makes it complicated too. But it's almost safest to say, if you want to be a Jew, then you can be a Jew. And I think I'm sort of leaning more in that direction, although for halachic purposes, because I'm part of a movement, the conservative movement, I'm sort of sticking to the party line to some degree. There is, though, an important caveat, and I'm going to conclude with this. I'm going to make one more quick point afterwards, but we're almost done. The caveat is this. In Israel, in the 1950s, 60s, basically, consisting of so many survivors of the Holocaust, refugees from all over the world, not just Europe, but also survivors of persecution in the Arab world. Once Israel was declared, of course, in places like Iraq, Yemen, Jews couldn't really live there anymore. So Israel had to come up with a much broader, more inclusive definition of who is a Jew than just a halachic definition of Jewish mother, or conversion, by the way. That also is a legitimate thing. So they adopted, of all things, the most ironic aspect of early Israeli history. They took the Nuremberg laws from Nazi Germany that defined who was a Jew for the purpose of persecution and ostracism and eventual death. And they said that, going back a generation to grandparents, having one Jewish grandparent would make one definably a Jew. for the law of return to go to Israel, to have refuge there, if you're anywhere in the world where you're being persecuted or just want to make aliyah, having a single Jewish grandparent suffices, or conversion to Judaism, even non-halachic, non-Orthodox conversion. Any conversion I do, you can move to Israel, even though they don't recognize me in many ways, the Israeli rabbinate, the Orthodox rabbinate, they would recognize my conversion. So the definition of a Jew has broadened out of necessity and out of humanity. At the same time, now we're seeing in Israel, with this new set of laws to disarm the judiciary, that could change, and it would change pretty quickly because the ultra-Orthodox establishment wants to go back to a purely rabbinically decided definition of who is a Jew. So I said there was one more thing after that, and I'm going to show you. It's not just about these words. I would say that there are, who is a Jew? How do you define who is a Jew? It's about values. Mitzvot, yes, but I want to get more specific than mitzvot. I want to talk about values. So if I can do that. So this, for instance, these are 7 Jewish values: respect, kavod, shalom bayit, peace in the home, looking at people in God's image, being responsible for one another, kol Yisrael arivim ze bazeh, watching one's language, not gossiping, loving your neighbor as yourself, the essence of all Torah, solidarity. I'm going to give you the link to these so you'll see it. You're never going to be able to read this. But this is a whole list of values, of qualities for teaching children, bringing peace between people, clothing the naked, kindness to animals, repairing the world, honoring the elderly, study, truth, visiting the sick, welcoming guests, haknasat orchim. There are Hebrew terms for all of these. These are all important Jewish values. Someone put them together as a periodic table. These are ethical qualities. I used this in my book Menschmarks, making mensches. Reverence and awe, love, gratitude, joy. We already mentioned those. Patience, loyalty, conviction, creativity. And again, I'm going to share with you some of these sources. So it's really important not to pigeonhole a single definition of what it means to be a Jew. I'd rather we, try to find the broadest possible definition. So I'm going to right now, whoops. So I put into the chat this is what's known as a packet. For each of the sessions of this class, for most of them, not all of them, I'll be distributing packets. It's a lot easier for me to give you a link than for me to try to stuff a 35-page item into an email. So I'll be doing that in this form. Anyway, in this packet, you can see, for instance, some other Jewish values. Here's a list of 38 Jewish values. A lot of these lists are fairly arbitrary, but they're all important. And this also has where in the Torah, key sources for Jewish ethics, including love your neighbor as yourself. And there are so many passages in the Torah. And I know I'm getting you dizzy, but I'm just showing you the extent to which you can find Jewish values. And then we'll get into some ethical concepts, Jewish bioethics. I mentioned that at the end of this first session, I would be giving you a sneak preview of our last session, which will be on ethics. So, but part of the definition of who is a Jew is one who lives a Jewish way of life. Or what is a Jew? What is Judaism? So, all right, I'm going to stop here and see if somehow you have any questions or comments. So Sarah, I'm sorry, Sandy, I'm just going to read Sarah's first. The issue of who's a Jew is an interesting question to me. My father's side of the family is Jewish. My mother's side is mixed. mostly Irish Catholic and British Isles Protestant. I'm named for my maternal great-great-grandmother, Sarah Rachel, who was the daughter of an Orthodox rabbi. You're Jewish. I mean, by any definition, it's your definition that matters more than anything. Who disowned her when she married a Welshman named Smith and bore 20 children. That's pretty Jewish, I guess. I don't know. 19 boys, 1 girl. Oh, like Jacob. So I don't really know how to accurately answer this question when asked if I am Jewish. Okay. So I'm not going to answer that question, except to say, I'll go back to that, whoever wants to be a Jew, I think should be accepted and welcomed into the Jewish people. Whether one also wants to be welcomed and accepted into various denominations of Judaism, that's a separate question, and we could talk about, where you would be comfortable. But without question, you could move to Israel if you would want to. But you should feel like, that the Jewish people would be welcoming. I should say that also Jews are not proselytizers. That's because we've mostly lived in countries where it would not be strategically sound to proselytize. But back in the ancient Roman world, million Romans converted to Judaism at one point. Was very popular, and it sells itself well on the marketplace of religion. Sandy, did you have a question?
We actually had a comment.
Yes.
When you talk about the basic components of Judaism, I remember going back to your column, al regel achat, on 1 foot, when you come back to Hillel's golden rule, that one of the basic concepts of being Jewish is the do unto your neighbors as you would have your neighbor do unto you, and everything else extrapolates from that.
Well, you know what? You have just completed this class, because that is the one question that was asked to the great sages Hillel and Shammai in the early rabbinic period. And Shammai said, what? Because the questioner said, while standing on 1 foot, give me the essence of Torah. Shammai sent him away with the equivalent of a rolling pin, and went to Hillel, who's much more lenient and inclusive. And Hillel stood on the 1 foot and said, what is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor, which is a form of love your neighbor as yourself. It's a form of do unto others as Jesus had it. And really, every established major religion has a form of this golden rule. But the part that's left out very often is what Hillel then said. That is the essence, basically. He said, now go and study. So you can't leave it at that. You have to find out more. You have to ask more questions. You have to be Yisrael. You have to struggle with God. You can't let it go. It's just what I'm telling you on 1 foot. One foot is good. That's the journalist. Now the rabbi is going to step in and say, let's go to town.
The rest is commentary.
Rest is comment. Absolutely. That's the end of it. And let's all do that. So anyway, any other questions? You can unmute if anyone would like to ask a question or make a comment. I'm going to go back to gallery. It's really wonderful to be doing this, to seeing all of you. I invite your comments and questions in between classes as well. And just another reminder that I will be putting this up on YouTube. So I'll send out the link. I have everyone's email address who has registered. If not, go onto the site to register, so that way we can make sure you're on the email list. There may be times, where we have to postpone a class or whatever. I'd want to be able to be in touch with you quickly. And there'll be no final exam, so not to worry, but I do appreciate your attendance. So thanks a lot, and have a very happy Purim.
Thank you.
Good night, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
Rabbi.
Bye. Have a good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.